Welcome, everyone. Today on the show, I had the honor of chatting with Mr. John Whitman, the author of Galaxy of Fear. Little cool cover for you there. It's a 12-book series that came out in 1997 and 98. They're scary stories for young readers. He has also done some audio drama work for Return of the Jedi, Tales of the Jedi, and Dark Empire. This man is highly creative and very talented. He is also the president of the Krav Maga Alliance Association, which is international. It's a form of martial arts. He's a 6th-degree black belt, and he's been training this for over 30 years. He's pretty BA. Our conversation was so much fun. We get some of his backstory, what it was like working on these projects, amongst others that he's involved with. He's a true gentleman. I hope you guys enjoy this conversation. I want to say thanks for your support. It means a lot to me. And without further ado, Mr. John Whitman. Yeah. All right. There. Well, I appreciate you taking the time to chat with
Oh,
me,
it's my
sir.
pleasure. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, I'm very excited. When I emailed you and I was telling you about how like your books are very popular during October because they're scary
Right.
to a point, right? One of my friends, Adam, he does like book reviews on his channel.
Okay.
And that's the first time I heard about your books. I'm like, really? Galaxy of Fear. So I haven't read them all just because I don't own them all.
Sure.
They're kind of hard to get.
They
to be
are.
honest
There are
with you.
places you can get them, but I mean they've been out of print for a while. So yeah.
Yeah.
In fact, I was a guest speaker at the Phoenix Fan Fusion Comic Con, and I brought a bunch of books that I have, and there were some fans who were real thrilled. They filled out their collections by getting some from me there. So yeah.
Yeah, I got a stack of them here, and I read one the other day because it's like I'm gonna read one because I got a book club with some friends, and we
Okay.
just finished the new Jedi Order series.
Oh, got it.
So
Okay.
we're taking a little break, and I'm like, I'm gonna read one of these quick, and they're really good. Like you did a
Oh, thank
great
you. I
job with
appreciate
them.
that.
Like
Thank you.
you got to play in a world, because it's kind of set between, we'll say, like a sequel to A New Hope,
Yeah.
right? So I mean, you
Yeah.
got some of the main characters get involved, and it's the story is like from chapter to chapters is very darn good.
Oh, I appreciate that. Yeah, and that was actually for me, that was the fun of it. I mean, this is 20 something years old, but I had done some other work for Lucasfilm, writing other stuff for them, and there are other adaptations. So I don't know if your own Star Wars fandom goes back this far, but back in the 90s, there were a bunch of comic books that were very popular, and one of them was called Dark Empire.
Oh yeah,
And for its time, it was huge. It was. I'm glad fans know about it because. Tom Beach, the guy who did it, they're great comics. Anyway, they were popular, and I was already doing work in the audiobook world. And we had the idea to find not just books, but other products to put on audio. And one of our ideas was to take comic books and essentially make radio plays out of them, but not for broadcast, just for sale on audio. And we approached Lucasfilm, and they were into the idea. So I wrote these adaptations for my company, but it was a license from Lucasfilm. And out of that, they got to know me, and they asked me to write these basically scary stories for kids set in the Star Wars universe. And I say all that background because the fun for me was they gave me parameters, but inside those parameters, I could do whatever I wanted. So it was a blast. Just to know that I couldn't go outside the lines, but inside the lines, I could do all kinds of stuff.
yeah. You got to play in that sandbox, that world,
Yeah,
as everyone likes
exactly.
to call it. Yeah, you
Yeah,
mentioned I was gonna bring that up because yeah, you've done Dark Empire, Tales of the Jedi, which
right.
is very popular. I
Yeah.
was turned on to that series from my friend Marcel, he does narrations, does a phenomenal job, great voice. He's got his own podcast, Legends of the Jedi podcast, where he
Oh,
does
cool.
that. Yeah, it's very good. And you mentioned Tom Veach. Did you get to talk with him at all? Like, was there
Yeah, a
any
little bit.
interaction?
Yeah, some, not a lot. Like basically, because we weren't going crazy with the script. I mean, we definitely took, I don't want to call them liberties, but we had to make changes because changes are necessary for audio. But our goal was to be as faithful as we could be to the product. So we didn't have to go back and talk a lot. But I did check some stuff with Lucas and with him. There were a couple. I can't even remember the issues now, but there were a couple things where It wasn't against canon, so Lucasfilm didn't have an opinion, but I wanted some feedback, so they put me in touch with Tom Veach, and I talked to him a little bit about just some of the interactions. And I mean, he was a good writer, so I got some good feedback from him.
Yeah. Yeah. Very talented. Very talented. And also you did Return of the Jedi too, as well.
Yeah, so that was actually fun. That was for me, that was the most nerve-wracking because no offense to any of us who write kind of the second tier stuff in Star Wars. But let's face it, there's always a difference between working on an ancillary product and working on one of the canonical pieces.
Yeah.
Yeah. And for those people in your audience who might not know, the BBC did an amazing radio production of A New Hope, and then they followed that up with another amazing production of Empire Strikes Back. And those are fantastic. And Return of the Jedi, they started, but there were basically some creatives involved who couldn't do it, and frankly, one who had passed away. And so it was shelved for a while. But then they wanted to finish it, and the script was incomplete. So they asked me to finish it. And now I always want to give credit where credit is due. I definitely wrote pieces of it, but most of it had been done. The adaptation to audio had already been done,
Yeah.
and except for some sections. So I really came in and just filled in the blanks. But even that was nerve wracking to realize that, okay, I'm writing canonical stuff here. And it was a blast for me, but it was a little bit nervous to take it on. So I wrote some of the scenes, and I had to not only adapt some scenes that existed, but I had to write some new scenes again to fill things in for radio. And then it was produced by that same BBC group.
Yeah. You're right. They're phenomenal. I turn them on at work from time to time when I'm working just to listen to it, and they did a great job. I would like to actually own them. I'm still trying to look for the CDs or,
Yeah, I'm not sure if they even. Yeah, that's a
uh,
good question. I know I got to listen to them again to do that project, but I can't recall what format they gave them to me in, or if I even have them still. But they were good. I encourage any of your listeners or viewers who can get a hold of them, listen that. Speaking for myself, I've been involved in audio for a long time. Listening to the radio version of that, actually on the radio years and years ago, is one of the things that got me interested in doing audio work.
okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, you're rolling right with me here. I was going to say, let's go back a little bit and let's talk about you growing up and some of the things that you were into that maybe you drew inspiration from to become this creative person. So you mentioned audio dramas.
Yeah, that was a bit later. So I'd always wanted to be a writer. And I mean, for me, Star Wars itself was a visual medium for me. Like I saw the movies. I'm old enough to. I stood in line to watch what it was even called to see Star Wars in '77. I was 10 years old. So for me, Star Wars was a visual medium. But as a writer, I'd always wanted to be a writer since I was 9. I was back then a big fantasy fan. I read The Lord of the Rings and The Hobbit, and the idea of creating my own world just was fascinating. So it took me a long time to get there, but I'd always wanted to write. And but I'd always been a Star Wars fan. And for me, in my kind of mid-20s, this all came together. Again, I've been doing some writing for a company that did audio products. And then, as I said earlier in this little broadcast, I got the chance to talk to Lucasfilm about adapting these comics. And for me, it was the best of all possible worlds. Like literally, the thing I want to do with my life blends in with a thing of which I'm a huge fan, and it couldn't have gotten any better for me. I got to go up to Skywalker Ranch a couple times and meet with people and talk, and it was a dream come true.
Oh man, I can only imagine. I can only imagine. And you mentioned Lord of the Rings. Every author I've talked to has all of them has said Lord of the Rings was a part of why they wanted to become a writer. Like
Yeah,
J.R. Tolkien was incredible.
yeah, and I'm glad to hear that other authors say the same thing. And I get this Comic Con I mentioned, the name came up from me and others as well. And I don't know, like I've never taken a survey or asked people of the generation after me if it has the same impact, because now there are a lot of great fantasy authors out there, and they have been for 20, 30 years. It's not only a genre, but there are it's generational where there's so many authors who are great now. But back then, when he wrote his books, and when I was a reader in the '80s of these books, it was seminal. There weren't that many things like it out there. So, it's not meant to sound patronizing, but he really was the father of that genre in many, many ways, at least of that modern genre. And yeah, I'm glad people are still aware of it. Obviously, the movies have helped, but just in
Oh,
terms of the
right.
books themselves, I'm glad people know about it.
Yeah, the movies absolutely. I mean, them movies are incredible.
Yeah,
I
Peter
mean,
Jackson did a fantastic
yeah,
job.
I, like I would say Star Wars is in my opinion is like the number one. The original films, right?
Yeah,
Were like they're epic, and Lord of the Rings is like right there with them.
yeah, I agree. I think they, in their branches of fiction, I think they are seminal works. So I heard the tone of your voice. I realize I'm the person being interviewed here, but what do you think of the other movies, or should I not put you on the spot?
Well, I like the prequels.
Okay.
The sequels, see, I want to say I'm like a post Legends expanded universe,
Okay.
like
Yeah.
after the
Yeah.
buyout. Like growing up, I loved the movies, the original trilogy. I
Right.
was born in the 80s.
Yeah.
So like the original trilogies is like key for me. But I didn't really understand like what had happened. Like I heard Disney bought it. I'm like, oh great, they got a lot of money. They're gonna make new movies. But I didn't
Yeah. Yeah.
realize there was all this expanded universe that so many people were attached to and had a passion for. Right.
Yeah.
And a lot of the stories are fantastic.
Yeah. I agree.
So I watched the movies. I was like, okay, it's a Star Wars movie. And then I started getting into the YouTube thing and meeting friends and creating relationships. And then I was kind of influenced, like, let's shit on them. Pardon my language, but that's kind of how it is. And then I spoke with Mike Beidler, and he explained to me like what he thought of the sequel trilogy. And I went back and rewatched them, and I just kept an open mind. So now I kind of keep the continuities, like I can decipher between the two. Right?
Yeah.
Like I
Okay.
just take the Disney stuff for what it is.
Yeah. That's fair. Yeah. Um,
What's your thoughts?
so for me, I might be a little bit harder on the prequels than you are, although I'm not as harsh as many other fans. I think people can be a little bit more brutal than those movies deserve. For me, there are two big issues with them. There are lots of little issues, but the two big ones are, and again, I wasn't close. By the time this came out, I had stopped doing a lot of Star Wars stuff, so I wasn't close enough at that point to ask anybody. But I still to this day don't get why they created a backstory where Anakin and Padme are such different. There's a big difference in their ages. That just created so much awkwardness that
Yeah.
they, it seemed like they had years to figure out a different plan and they didn't. So that I think created other structural problems that were hard to overcome. They overcame them, but I think it caused more problems than it solved. And the other one for me was much more straightforward. I think that there was so much CGI that a lot of the actors didn't have chemistry. Um,
Mm.
uh, I am okay with the overall plot of all three of those prequels. I think they're, if you summarize the plots, I think they're interesting. Um, I think if you describe the scene by scene, most of it's really good. I feel like there wasn't as much character interaction as in the original three movies. Those are my two big things. We could pick apart lots of little things. Jar
Right.
Jar Binks would come up in most conversations.
Yeah. All the
But
time.
but yeah, but mostly for me it was a CGI. And again, I'm going to be a little bit harsh on the original three movies, which I love, but let's face it, the acting wasn't always amazing in those first three movies, but at least there was great character interaction. They were looking at each other and talking to each other. Whereas in the prequels, there's so much CGI that you don't get that energy sometimes.
Yeah.
I think that's attracted, but I'm okay. Like I'll rewatch Phantom Menace anytime. Like I'm okay giving it a try. I think that the storytelling, the plotting, except for the Padme and Anakin thing, is fine. Um, the sequels for me, I'd be a little bit harder on those.
I understand. Like I get it. Like I absolutely get it. And
Yeah,
that's all you really see lately in headlines is like Disney's ruining Star Wars. Like, we'll be honest, that's all you ever hear. I
yeah,
think some of the stuff they have done is okay so far. Like the Mandalorian, I thought brought a lot of new people into the world, into the
yeah.
galaxy, if you will.
Yeah.
I thought
Yeah.
Ahsoka was okay. I thought that was good.
I enjoyed this. So I enjoyed Ahsoka, and I think most people did. Yeah, I haven't paid attention to the overall fan base, but the people I interact with thought Ahsoka was good. And I want to get your opinion because this might be a little bit less of a consensus, but I like Kenobi. I
Yeah,
did. I thought I
me
now
too.
again like the series always are. I'll use my word for it. The series are often a little bit shallower. It feels like they're a little bit uh, they're television like,
Yep.
but the idea of Obi-Wan Kenobi having PTSD and dealing with it is not only an interesting story, it's accurate. It feels like that should have happened even to a Jedi like him. Like these guys who were supposed to defend the galaxy and protect right, they had their world ripped out from under them and they failed. And I think it's worth telling that story. So I enjoyed Kenobi.
Yeah, I did too. I thought it was. I was happy to see. I'm always happy to see the actors that were involved back
Yeah.
in it. You
Yeah.
know, Ewan McGregor, Hayden Christensen. Like I and that him reaching out for Qui-Gon, like that was emotional.
Yes. Yeah. For me, and I'm sure I'm not the only one, but for me, the moment that was kind of victorious in that series was toward I think it was the final episode, if not the end of the penultimate episode, when he and Vader are facing each other, and he's finally asserting himself, and Vader says to him, "Oh, now the line is like, now you're back," or "Now it's you." Like it's not just there's not really this heroic moment of Kenobi rising, and that's happening, but the feature, the focus is on Vader recognizing his power, and I love that little
Yeah,
moment. It's one line. I thought that was great.
yeah, that interaction was fantastic, and even there was some dark scenes in that when he was looking for Obi-Wan walking down that alleyway, we'll say, and just dragging people and snapping necks. Like that was pretty dark.
Yeah, yeah, and that's that's I think that's the character we all want. Like
Yeah,
that's who Vader's built up to be, even from A New Hope. And for reasons that I think probably involved, PG ratings and things like that, they gave the impression of him being violent, but they don't show much of it until
right.
you get to that end of Rogue One. And you like we want to see that's the guy we all love to hate, right?
Right.
So they show him in some of these follow up series, and I think that's cool, fantastic. So
Y-
you can follow Disney, but credit them for doing that stuff.
Oh, absolutely. And that's like you nailed it. That's the Vader we want because that's what we read about in the books. There's a lot of books where he's supposed to be violent and hunting Jedi and killing them and destructive. And I thought it was great. Um, what
Yeah,
about Andor? Did you
I
want?
loved it. So and this is the other side of that same equation for again for friends of mine as well, but I'll speak for myself. I want to see more of the Jedi. I liked Ahsoka. I loved the interplay of characters in the animated series. Right, I love those things. But I also like seeing the other side of the equation, and I love the fact that not Andor is definitely, but even Rogue One to a large degree, it's a bunch of stuff without Jedi, without lightsabers. Obviously Rogue One has its scenes, but a lot of Rogue One is all the other people involved in the
Yep.
rebellion, not the Jedi. And Andor, there's not a lightsaber in sight, and it's still a fantastic Star Wars story.
It took me a second rewatch to really enjoy it. I
Mm,
didn't like it at first because that when the time it came out, I wanted something light to take me away.
yeah,
Right? Like that's what we all want.
yeah,
Like the flashy, the lightsabers, that's what. But then on the other hand, it's like, wait a second. This is like real life stuff that we don't get to see and we can all relate to it to some
yeah.
degree. And I thought it was fantastic. I loved it.
Yeah, and I agree. And I totally see that. I think a friend had told me I had watched it before me and described it, so I went in prepared for it not to be a lightsaber duel. But I can see somebody taking a while to get into it because it is slow and it is
Yeah.
character driven. It's not action driven until the last few episodes. But for the reason you described, I enjoyed it. I got into it. I, I would guess again. I'm not going to give Disney more credit than it deserves, but I would guess that the reason it succeeded, and I hope it did as it did, was because other stuff had come out. I feel like if there had been no Star Wars content for 5 years and then Andor came out, I think fans would have been much more unhappy, right?
Oh yeah.
It wouldn't be the first thing you'd want to watch. But when there is other content out there that has more of the Star Wars superficial flavor, I think Andor had a great place, and I think they nailed it in that sense.
Yeah. Yeah, they did a great job. The Book of Boba Fett was okay. I really liked the culture of the Tusken Raiders. Like I liked how that all evolved and the interaction with them. Like we don't get to see a lot of them any other
Yeah,
places.
yeah,
So
that's
I
true.
thought I thought that was cool. A lot of people were mad because Boba Fett wasn't how Boba Fett was supposed to be set to be. Ruthless and a thug and a bounty hunter.
Yeah.
So
I was not a big fan. I'll just leave it there. I was not a big fan of that particular series.
yeah, that's fine. Yeah, I mean, like I said, the Tuscan thing was probably my favorite overall. Just that the culture.
Yeah,
I thought
yeah.
that was interesting.
But when we mentioned Boba Fett, the character, not the series, and you mentioned before the whole legacy aspect of Star Wars. It's an interesting struggle. And I can speak both as a fan and as somebody who did a little bit of writing in this area. The struggle between the fans' perception of characters and really the fan-driven lore about characters versus George Lucas's perception and then the kind of surrounding him the official makers' perceptions. Like the classic example is, because there had been so little literature about Boba Fett, we all had this impression of him as taciturn. It was created by fan, like taciturn and doesn't speak very much. It must be a hard-boiled guy. And then in the remakes, when Lucas has Boba Fett scratching that girl under the chin, like that's not him. That's not the guy we expect. So there's this pushback. There's this fight over who the characters are. I find that fascinating to deal with both as a fan, and because I had that right. My reaction was, "That's not the guy I expect. I don't want him scratching. He's not flirting with slave girls. Like he should be, on guard. He should be looking." It annoyed me, and I annoyed others. But I matched that, if you mind me ranting for a minute, against
go on.
some of the stuff that I got to write. So you mentioned that I got to finish the script for Return of the Jedi. So one of the scenes I had to fill in was Han Solo captured by Jabba the Hutt, right? And because of the structure of the narrative, I had to fill in some space, and I did a scene where Boba Fett goes to sort of gloat over or present himself to Han Solo. And that's in the radio play of Return of the Jedi. And for me, again, my image of Boba Fett, this is before the enhanced versions, this is before the movies came out again. And so I thought, well, how am I going to write a scene with a guy who doesn't talk? Like, he can speak, but and this is for some of your audience, this is way before we had a lot of new literature about Boba Fett. All we knew about Boba Fett was that we knew he'd somehow survived the Sarlacc, but in the story I'm writing, it's before that, and we told the guy he's a tough, badass guy and doesn't talk very much. So I wrote this scene, and you hear his footsteps, and you hear Han Solo talking to him, but he never responds. And basically it ends up being a monologue from the actor playing Han Solo with some Foley sounds, some sound effects of Boba Fett's armor moving or him shifting his weapon and things like that. And it's all reaction stuff to Han Solo being a smartass and trying to challenge him and get a rise out of him. Because Han Solo at that moment is helpless, is just trapped. And the only line I give to Boba Fett is something like, I actually forget the line up. It's like, "Goodbye, Solo." Like, that's it. But that was my challenge, because this is way before we had an idea of who Boba Fett is now. Like, now we've seen him in the series. We know more about him that's canonical. But back then, you know almost nothing. So I had to write a scene with this guy who basically doesn't talk, and a radio play with him not talking at all.
Yeah. Oh, man. Yeah, that was probably challenging. Very challenging. Now, when you write something... Go ahead. I didn't mean to cut you off.
No, it was fun. It was fun. It was a fun challenge.
Now, when you got to fill in a gap or try to add something, do you have to run that by? Like, is there someone that's got to just say, "Hey, yeah, that'll work. That's good."
So yes, but it's at least in my experience, especially back then, it was two different layers. So there's always somebody reading everything. In fact, Lucasfilm. This is back in the days when the role playing games were huge. Lucasfilm hired me to be one of their outside editors. I would vet a lot of the ancillary products because they trusted my judgment at that time.
Yeah,
Uh, uh, to um, to vet. So I was one of the outsiders, but everything gets looked at by somebody.
okay.
Now, again, lower level stuff, less impactful stuff that we would now call not even just legacy, but the tiny items inside legacy stuff gets looked at. But by as long as it's okay with somebody they've hired, they're going to be okay with it. The bigger and more impactful and more canonical the character is, the more it gets looked at. For instance, I got to kill off Dr. Evazan in one of my books.
Yep.
And that had to be approved at the top. Like I said, listen, because I got to write cameos for any of your audience that hasn't read my books, which is maybe a lot of them. All of my books, the books are centered on characters that were new, that were invented, but all the heroes have cameos. So throughout the 12 books, a lot of the people that you would know from other stories appear as cameos. And in one of my books, I wanted to kill off Dr. Evazan. So it was actually a pretty small scene in the plot of the book, but it had to be approved by at the top.
Yeah. Yeah. Did you ever get to talk with George? I know you mentioned Skywalker Ranch, and did you ever meet the guy?
Yeah, I met him one time. And listen, it'd be very much a huge lie to say that I knew him. I got to be in a room with him, and I got to meet him because there were a couple of licensing events where we all got to go, and basically they were big meetings where it was okay. Here's Lucasfilm's plan for Star Wars for the next few years. You guys are all involved in some way. You're writing books, or you're making toys, or whatever you're doing. So here's our plan. Let's discuss how your stuff's going to fit into our plan. That was the nature of the events I went to. And he spoke at them, and I got to be there and shake hands. But I wouldn't say he knew me. I was not.
Yeah.
I was not that important.
Yeah.
But yeah, I worked a lot more with Lucy Wilson and Sue Rostoni. At the time, these are the people who were doing the licensing division. And it was cool. I'm not sure if any of your audience knows them, but Lucy, when I was doing work with them, was the head of the licensing division, meaning all the products that weren't the movies were passing through her hands. And I haven't talked to her in years, so let me know if I get this wrong. But Lucy started as George Lucas's assistant, so I got to work with her, and she remembers sitting on his porch and typing out the original draft of the Star Wars script. Yeah, it was cool to talk with her.
Yeah, she played a big crucial role into like a lot of the books and everything that we've gotten. And yeah, she was. I reached out to her actually. I talked with her a little bit through email.
Oh, good. Okay.
She was very nice and kind. She's not up for doing a podcast, which is cool. I totally get it. I get it. Not everybody wants to come on and talk about stuff, but she was very kind and nice to me. But it would be
plus
interesting.
It was her job for years and years.
Yeah. I think she's involved in painting and arts and stuff now, so it's
very
pretty cool.
Good.
Yeah, and Sue Rostoni, I've heard her name a lot too, and I can't find how to contact her, but I know there was a small group that really made all this come to life and push for things, and it's great.
Yeah, and honestly, I think again, making no comparisons to Disney, but that group back then, in my opinion, did a great job of wanting to push some more product out. Everything from, like I said, from role playing games to books to back then the Kevin J. Anderson books and like all those things. They wanted that product out there. That's how I got my books published. They wanted to do those books, but they really, really cared about the product. Like they were really careful. Okay, this fits inside Star Wars. This doesn't. This fits the vision. Essentially, they were, in my opinion, pretty good caretakers of the product, even while pushing out a lot of stuff.
Yeah, it seems like I don't want to say back then, but back in that era, is completely like it was almost camaraderie. I can't even say the word right now. I'm fumbling, but
commoditized.
Yeah, like they cared, they were passionate about it, and now it's like nothing is really like that anymore, right? I'm not in any
Star
business.
Wars.
Yeah, just in general, like they just want to they don't take the time or care about it enough. It to me, it seems like more just push it and get it out there. And
Yeah, I mean, it's funny. I'm interrupting you. I apologize, but I, I share your pessimism to some degree, but and maybe I'm being too optimistic. But I do see some hope. And you mentioned Ahsoka earlier, and let me know if you disagree with this. But I see hope for the future of these products in things like in Ahsoka. I think they nailed Thrawn. I think that the way they presented Thrawn and Ahsoka fit almost 100%, not quite, but my vision of Thrawn. So somebody somewhere got that character. And that's a combination of the actor and the director and the scriptwriter. They got that person. So there's at least some of that happening inside the series now. And I just hope they grab onto those elements and those people and continue with them.
yeah, yeah. I'm gonna end the stream now. You upset me. No, I'm just kidding. I'm just kidding.
Did you hate Thrawn? Did you not like him?
No, I thought he was good. I'm glad that they used Nicholson I mean, he was the voice in Rebels. I enjoyed Rebels. I really liked Rebels. But some people are probably going to say, well, that's not the Thrawn that Timothy Zahn wrote. You know, there's going to be that. I've heard that discrepancy.
Now, educate me, because what's that fight? Because I know Thrawn more. I think about Thrawn more from what I read in the Zahn books than I think about from Rebels. So I actually it matched up for me, the Thrawn that I saw in Ahsoka. What's the discrepancy?
Just that he doesn't act the way that he did in the original books. And he's got pupils now, and back then he didn't, like, his eyes were pure red. Maybe some of the
Oh,
mannerism, like very tedious stuff, we'll say.
okay.
Right?
Yeah,
I thought it was fine.
The eyes didn't bother me at all. Yeah, the eyes didn't bother me at all. I felt like the only thing missing, and I think they couldn't necessarily put it in the show. Like, I remember from the Zahn books, Thrawn's ability to analyze the artwork of a culture and use that to, that didn't appear in Ahsoka, but so what? Like, but I felt like the character, the analytical nature, his insightfulness, his ruthlessness, not in, like, taking a gun and shooting somebody, but his, like, okay, here's my mission, here's my goal. As long as my goal is achieved, I don't care. Like, I felt like that was Thrawn.
Yeah.
And I guess the parts that impacted me from the book series were in that character. So if any of your audience disagrees with me, they should write to you or write to me. But I actually thought it was what I wanted from that character.
Yeah, I honestly thought it fit. It was good. I
Yeah.
really liked the mystical, magical, the Night Sisters and the Stormtrooper zombies. Like, I thought that was really cool. Kind of paid an homage to Death Troopers in a sense. Like, that
Yeah.
was kind of, for me, that was cool.
Yeah. The
Yeah,
only
I
part of all.
thought it was good. I thought he was good.
Okay. Well,
Yeah.
I'd love to hear what your fans think about it if they disagree, because I love this stuff. Like, this to me is interesting discussion about when characters, when they're, I'll say this, when they're well done, but there are disagreements among the fans. Like, that's where it gets intriguing, because we all get different impressions of the characters.
Yeah.
And that's where we get to have fun with it.
Yeah, and
I will say,
go ahead, finish.
and this is going to be a more controversial statement for some of your fans, but the only thing about the entire kind of post original films during the prequels that gets me is, again, I'm very old school, so I'm aware of all the products that have come out since, and I've read a lot of the books. I haven't played a lot of the video games, but the Star Wars that I know from sort of A New Hope and Empire Strikes Back is a galaxy with really nobody left in it who's force sensitive. And I know they had to change that to tell more stories. They needed more. I'm speaking totally from a narrative, creative background. You need more people with the force so you can tell more cool stories. And I get it. But I have a little trouble embracing a lot of that post New Hope stuff, because I just expect a galaxy where almost nobody has a lightsaber that's force sensitive. But of course, when you watch, things like Rebels and the Clone Wars, you discover there are all kinds of people who have it still.
Yeah.
So that's my biggest problem with some of that stuff, and I'm sure a lot of your audience doesn't agree with that, but it irks me every time.
Well, yeah, there's some people. Well, on Thrawn, real quick, like Timothy Zahn created that character, right? And it seems like they didn't really give him a lot of input into how he should be portrayed coming from a book to the screen, if that
Right.
makes sense. So I've
Yeah.
heard that too. I like to hear everybody's opinions too, because you're right. Everybody's got different ideas, and some can change others, and it's fun. It's engaging.
Yeah.
For the Clone Wars and Rebels, like I kind of agree with you. Like, but you're right. They needed to tell more stories. Like there was really no
Yeah.
other way to do it. Some I think they went a little overboard with. It's kind of hard that they added a few seasons to the Clone Wars after Disney took over, so they could fill that
Right.
gap in, right?
Right.
And there's a lot of discrepancy there too. But most of the animated stuff I find fun. But the Tartakovsky Clone Wars, the micro
Yeah.
series, have you, what
Right.
did you watch that? Did you enjoy that?
Uh, I think I've watched it all. I can't remember what was what at this point, but I don't recall disliking any of it. I think I was engaged more than others. Sometimes I think like Rebels was interesting, but I really can't remember what part of it you're referring to now. So refresh my memory. Like
Oh,
what
it
part?
came out in 2003. They were like 3-minute long episodes, very little
Oh no,
dialogue.
I've heard of them. I haven't seen them.
Okay.
Somebody else was telling me about this. Yeah,
Yeah,
they're
you
good. Do you
should.
like them?
Yeah, it's great. I highly suggest that you can watch the whole 2 seasons in an hour and a half,
Like,
I think.
I've heard that. Yeah.
Yeah, it's fun.
And for me, all that stuff we're talking about now, I enjoyed all of it. Like when I talk about having a little reticence about all the people who suddenly are force sensitive and have lightsabers out there, I actually enjoyed watching all that stuff. The fact of Ahsoka, I think, is very cool. I just somewhere in the back of my head is always my memories of being engaged in a world where they've been almost wiped out. Where
Yeah.
basically, I mean, if you again, they do a good job of dancing around some of that dialogue from the original movies. But if you watch the original movies, it was the impression you're left with is that it's pretty much it's Ben Kenobi, it's Yoda, and it's Luke who's the hope of the Jedi. Like there's no hint of anybody else out there. So that's as an old time viewer and fan, that's in my heart somewhere.
Yeah, yeah.
So I have that always in the back of my mind. But having said that, I really enjoy pending accepting some of the stuff we mentioned. I really enjoy all the new stories. I'm willing to take all the grain of salt and say, oh yeah, I guess that there were Inquisitors on the dark side and there were survivors on the light side. Okay, I'm going to go with it.
Yep, run with it. Yeah, I hear what you're saying. I hear what you're saying. Now, you mentioned a little bit ago that did you read a lot of the older books as well? I know you're a fan, obviously, but
I mean, listen, the first book I can remember reading was it's not canonical, but have you ever heard of A Splinter of the Mind's Eye?
oh yeah, oh yeah,
Yeah, I have no idea. Like, it's been so long for me that I have no idea if that is even acknowledged in the Star Wars world anymore. But I can remember
it is.
that book, um,
Mhm.
and I read the Zahn books. I read a number of the Kevin J. Anderson books. Um, I read some, but didn't read a ton of the whole Rogue Squadron. I read some of them, and after that, it was very a scattershot for me. So
Okay.
I never dove in and read any of like was it Stackpole wrote a bunch
Yeah,
of
he did.
books
He
as
did that.
well.
He did a lot of the Rogue Squadron stuff.
Right.
He
Yeah.
did
And
I
he
Jedi.
as well, I think. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
But for you, it's kind of at that point, and this is not so much for your audience, but at that point, I'd kind of moved on from Star Wars. I'm still a fan, but I just started getting involved in other things and reading and writing other things. So I never became a I didn't fill my library at a certain point. Let's put it that way.
Right. It makes sense.
I hear
It
there's
makes
good
sense.
stuff out there though.
Yeah. Oh yeah. Yeah. I'm reading it for the first time. A lot of these,
Yeah.
books that have been around for a while. Yours included.
Yeah.
Now, there was some material a few things that got shelved, we'll say, that were involved, like fairy tales with
Yeah.
Jaina and the twins.
Yeah.
Can you talk about
Yeah.
that a little bit?
Sure, it was in that same era when Lucasfilm was looking to expand. The original project I mentioned where we did these comic books on audio was at the same area where Lucasfilm was trying to take care of their product, but also expand. And so the audio books of comics did pretty well. And again, I was lucky enough to have a decent relationship with them, and we did the Galaxy of Fear series, and they asked if I would try writing some. The Galaxy of Fear books are called chapter books. They're for kids anywhere from 10 to 15. They're not quite young adult. Young adult would be a little bit older, but they're definitely for kids who can read and read in chapters. They're not little kids books. But Lucasfilm wanted some books for for either very young readers or pre-readers, books that can be read to the kids. And so we did some experimentation. And I'm not going to speak at all to the writing because I did the writing, and I think some of it was okay and some of it was not. But the only reason I'm sorry those books never got published is the publisher. I had a little input, but it was mostly the publisher. Found some amazing artists. There were a couple artists, and they did these stylistic color paintings basically for each page that were just fantastic. And they were a little bit different. They were more kid-like, but like rich drawings for kids. A counterexample I would say is if you think about the Book of Boba Fett and the really interesting sketch work they show at the end of each episode, it would be the opposite of that. It was like it wasn't stark, drastic sketches. It was rich, colorful line drawings and paintings, and they never got published. Nobody ever got to see them. So,
man, really?
Yeah. It's funny because I did a podcast a while ago, and the interviewer asked me if I had any. I thought I still had a couple. I was going to send him one if I could find one. I thought I saved a couple of them, but I can't find them, and so it's lost to posterity. But tell your audience honestly that the writing was probably mediocre, but the drawings were amazing.
No, you're really good from what I read. I know you're back to writing now, which we can get to that too. I mean, I really enjoy talking with you. This is fun. I like the engagement in your opinions and stuff. Sometimes you don't get that from other people to a degree. So again, thank you for taking the time. This is fun.
Happy to do it.
I'm having a blast. So you kind of you got out of the galaxy, right? Was that a choice that you wanted to do? Like you wanted to take a break? Because I know that you're involved with Krav Maga. That's another awesome thing. Like you're a badass. I'm just gonna say that you're a badass.
But so, as far as Star Wars, the truth is it was probably mutual, and there was no animosity. Like I had at the time that I stopped doing projects. As far as I know, I still had a great relationship with Lucy and Sue. But really, I had done stuff for them. I had done a lot, and there are products we haven't mentioned that were just kind of adaptations. I rewrote Star Wars as a smaller tchotchke book. I did a bunch of other projects for them.
Yeah.
So I had my run, and I think from their point of view, they were just looking for new authors and new names, which is totally fair. And from my point of view, I'd written a lot, and I was ready to do other things. So I moved on back then. I moved on. I wrote 4 novels in a whole different genre, action books based on a character named Jack Bauer. The show 24. I wrote 4 original novels based on that character, and those were a blast. And I moved on. So I don't know if I had said to Lucy or Sue, hey, I'm desperate for another book. I'm not sure what they would have done, but they were pretty clear that they were looking for new authors. They gave me a lot of titles. Now they were looking for somebody new. And honestly, I was happy to move on because I had done a lot of stuff.
Yeah. You did some comic book work, chronicle books. I mean, you did a lot of other stuff, and plus the audio dramas. I mean, you were kind of in the mix of it in the beginning, we'll say, of like expansion.
Yeah. That is absolutely true. What I always want to give credit where credit's due and not give myself credit when it's not due. I always think I was a smaller player. Listen, at the time, I got to sit in a room with Kevin J. Anderson. He was writing much bigger books than mine. He was a much bigger name than I was. But yes, I was one of the people back then they got to tap to push new stuff out there, and I was honored to be part of it.
Yeah. That was it seems like everyone I talked to that was in that era, it was just like a pinnacle time. It was just magical, we'll say.
If this is a bit of a non sequitur, but one story about how much lore and literature the people at Skywalker Ranch and also Skywalker Sound had way before any of us were talking about an expanded universe. This is a short story to give you an idea of how much stuff they just had in their archives. So I was doing one of the Dark Empire adaptations we did. I think it was the first one. And again, we had our own production team creating them, but we were being supervised by Lucasfilm, and we got to interact with Skywalker Sound, Industrial Light and Magic, for some of the work. And in fact, I didn't go up for this one thing, but we actually went up there. The group did, to record something because we wanted a certain thing, and their sound stage was better for it. But when we were trying to gather sound assets for the production, I called up to Industrial Light and Magic, and I said, "Listen, so we're doing this project," and they knew they knew of us. And I said, "But we need some Wookiee sounds for this thing." And that seemed like a pretty simple request. And the guy said, "Well, what kind of Wookiee sounds do you need? You have to be much more specific for us." And I said, "Well, in the scene, it's going to be Chewbacca, obviously, and it's going to be kind of, we probably need two different sounds. One sounds angry and one sounds a little bit happy. So if you can send me two of those, we'll just use those." And the guy said, "Man, you have to be way more specific than that." And I said, "Why? Just give me one angry one and one happy one." And he said, "You don't understand. I have 10,000 Wookiee sounds." He said, "You can't just tell me. I probably have like 500 angry ones." This was just Chewbacca sounds. So this was my entree way back then into getting started in this world. These people have an entire archive of stuff that none of us have heard about. They have 10,000 Wookiee sounds.
That's crazy. Like,
could you imagine
that person's job was just to come up with that? I mean, holy.
And I realized why he couldn't just take a direction from me that said angry one. Like, he probably had a computer file, like a whole CD-ROM full of just angry.
Yeah. Did they ever give you anything while you were writing the books, like some sort of archive material or disc or anything, or to like go through?
Honestly, you mean for research?
Yeah.
No, I got asked questions, but no. And to be frank, I didn't. For the books I was writing, again, the goal of my books was to expand the universe. So as long as my stuff fit in the world and didn't violate rules, they actually wanted new stuff. So there was never a moment in the writing of my books where I needed a bunch of archival material. And again, especially back then, I was such a huge fan that I pretty much knew everything. So I never really needed to dig deep until we needed like audio things or their actual hardware. And then you realize, God, these guys have been at this for a long time.
Yeah. Do you still dabble with audio? Do you still do anything from time to time?
Only as a fan. I mean, I'm a big fan of audiobooks, but no. I was the executive editor of Time Warner audiobooks for years. And we went from being a small division to becoming the audiobook company for Warner Books. And back then I was doing a lot. But no, now I'm saying now I want to write the books now and listen to them.
That's it. Yeah. Yeah, I have a hard time, to be honest with you, with audiobooks. Like, audio drama is a little different. It's a whole different thing. Yeah. Like, I can deal with that, but an audiobook, it's like I need to just hone in on, make sure I'm not missing something. Does that make sense? Like,
yeah. I get it. For me, I'm that way with nonfiction. If it's nonfiction, I have to read it. I have to have the pages in front of me. I have to flip the pages. I have to be able to flip back a few pages to get a data point but for fiction, for me, as long as the reader is good, I actually enjoy having fiction read to me. So now the reader has to be good, but as long as they are, I can get into it that way.
Yeah. I hear what you're saying. I've tried at work a few times, but it's like, oh, I got to try to rewind it or skip to I've missed something and then I get mad. It's like, well, forget it, because I just enjoy the feel of the book, and then that's my focus.
Yeah.
You know, I read a lot in the morning. That's when I do most of my reading. When I get up a few hours before everyone and drink coffee and read. That's what I.
What do you mostly read?
Right now, we're gonna move on to the Dark Nest trilogy, by Troy Denning, right after the New Jedi Order. Yeah, a
Yeah.
few of my buddies, we get together once a week. We read so much, and then we talk about it. We've been friends for years, and it's something to get us together. We all have families, careers,
Yeah.
right? So you don't mingle
Yeah.
with your friends as much anymore.
Yeah. And
So
book clubs are great because you get to
yeah,
actually dig into something. Yeah.
yeah, we get really good conversations, kind of like we were having about the shows and things like that,
Yeah.
and it's fun. And some of the people that listen to me are like, "Well, you guys should do a podcast and talk about it." So we were looking into getting. It's expensive, so we could all be in the same room and talk
Oh,
rather
right.
than
Yeah.
like we're
Yeah.
doing now, make it a little more
Yeah.
interesting. But the
Yeah.
equipment is like just for a soundboard is like $7 or
Yeah.
$1,000, and it's like, well,
Yeah.
this is just something for fun.
And then making sure everybody's mic'd up well and the sound is good for each person. It sounds like the danger is that one person on the mic and everybody else in the background. Unless
Right?
everyone's mic'd up well, that's going to happen. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, you would know what I'm talking about. You dealt in that kind of world, so I don't know. We're still deciding on what we're gonna do. It'd be cheaper and quicker just to go buy a webcam and a microphone and do it from our homes.
Right.
But if we thought it would be more engaging and cool for people to watch and see, because a lot of people, like you said, they like to have and hear those conversations of what people think.
Yeah, yeah. I would, especially if it were a book that I had read. Speaking for myself, if I were your potential audience, I would be intrigued by conversations about books I had read, um, uh, because I want to hear that. Now, hearing about a book I haven't read would also be interesting because it might draw me to that book. But the debate, the discussion points would be fascinating for books that I had already become familiar with. You guys
Right.
should do that group thing about a bunch of the Star Wars books. Your fans would be the same fan base, but it could be your group discussing books that your whole fan base knows. Do that.
Yeah. Yeah. That was the plan. So we're still debating on what we're gonna
Okay.
do. I would like to be in the same room. I think that would be fun. I think it would be,
Yeah.
and people would like
Yeah.
to watch that. Better camera, better
No,
setup,
exactly.
and
Oh,
it'd be fun. So going from books, now I mentioned martial arts a little bit, if you
right.
don't mind talking about that.
No, happy to. Oh.
Yeah, I mean, you're the president of the Krav Maga Alliance Association. Like
Yeah.
that's a
So
big
I'm
deal.
Yeah, thank you. I have been doing Krav Maga. For any of your audience that doesn't know, Krav Maga is the official system of the Israeli military. It's a very aggressive and practical self-defense system and combat system. It's used by a ton of law enforcement agencies and military units around the world. I've trained many of them myself. I got involved in it 30 something years ago. And For those of you who care, I'm a sixth degree black belt in Krav Maga. I've been doing it for a long time. Um, uh, and I used to be I used to be president of another really big organization, an organization that's still really big and popular. And then I basically left that organization, had a disagreement with my colleagues, and started the Krav Maga Alliance, which is one of the biggest organizations around the world. It's a network of schools all over the globe that all practice Krav Maga and have Krav Maga schools. I've written a couple of books, a couple of best-selling books on Krav Maga as well.
Yep.
So that's still martial arts and authorship, but it's the other side of my life. Yeah.
Yeah, that's interesting when I learned that about you. Um, I'm like, that's because I've always loved martial arts. Like I've always been intrigued by it.
Do you practice? Are you? Do you already?
I did some taekwondo for a little while, something I was gonna do with my boys, and then COVID happened, so that
Oh
shut
yeah,
everything down.
yeah, yes, it did. Yeah,
And then we just obviously they kind of fell off, and I wasn't gonna just keep going by myself. I did do some
yeah.
of my own things from watching. Like I know you're into CrossFit as well, right? Like
Sure.
you
Yeah,
do some training
yeah,
and
yeah,
strength and conditioning, which is awesome.
yeah.
I used to love that. I used to lift and run. It was like a passion of mine, and then I got hurt, and now I can't do it anymore.
Oh
Um,
no.
but I used to Pavel Satsulin. Have you heard the name? The Russian
The,
kettlebell
the kettlebell guy.
strong
Sure, kettle. Yeah,
strong
yeah,
first. Yeah, was
yeah.
a big component of it. I loved kettlebells. I would train with them all the time. Great tool for conditioning.
Absolutely, I agree. For me, I use kettlebells as a component of my training, but I use them a lot. I know some people who are incredibly fit who basically kettlebells are the focus of their conditioning, and they absolutely can't be. For me, I use that as a component. I like them for the combination, basically strength through range of motion. Like that's what
Yeah.
you're gonna get with kettlebell work. I do a lot of barbell work, and barbell work is, if you want to get stronger, barbell work is probably better than kettlebells
Yeah.
because you can put heavier weights on. But there's almost nothing better out there for strength through ranges of motion than kettlebell work. It's fantastic.
Yes.
And you can see the
Yeah.
people who do it, like Pavel. I don't know. I think I met him once, but I don't know him personally. But if you look at that guy, he's not massive, but you can see in his body that he can be in all kinds of positions. And he's just strong in all of them.
Yeah. It's wild when I came across him and in the Strong First organization, and then I just fell in love with, like you said, through range of motion. Like there's so many great moves you can do. Like the Turkish get up is just phenomenal.
Yeah, yeah.
You know,
Um,
but barbell works like 5x5. Is that kind of what you?
Well, I do partly because of CrossFit and partly because of personal interest. I do a lot of Olympic lifting, so I'll do cleans,
Clean
clean
and
and
press.
jerk, snatch.
Yeah.
And that's because, and I'm going to advocate this for any of your fans who do martial arts. I'm a big believer in that sort of lifting work for explosiveness as it translates to martial arts. All striking is explosiveness. For grappling work, there are moments of explosiveness that you need. And you'll get a lot of that from Olympic lifting. So I do a lot of back squats. I do a lot of what I would call power lifting or support lifts as well.
Yeah.
I deadlift, all that stuff. But the core of my own training is the Olympic lifts for the explosiveness.
Yeah. That's it. It works, yeah, boy. I loved it.
Yeah.
Oh, I loved it so much.
Well, so back to the martial arts. I've been teaching for 30 something years. And the cool thing for me is just making people safer. I'm a big, I own a gym, and the main motto for my gym, because we do Krav Maga and CrossFit, is safer and stronger. Like I want everybody to feel those two things. And there are various aspects of both those meanings, but I want people in their lives to feel safer and stronger in their bodies and their lives. And training in martial arts provides some of that.
Yeah. Yeah. I think it's a great tool. Even jujitsu. I think all that stuff is great. I think everyone should have some sort of a disciplined martial arts, not just well, you are a badass, but you know what I'm saying? Just to have that and be able to control themselves, because it does more than just protect or learn how to fight. Like you gain self control through that.
Yes, I was going to say something, but you kind of just took the words from my mouth. You get both a personal sense of control and a physical sense of control. You do learn to move your body better, which is fantastic for all of us. But you also learn about yourself. And I don't want to discourage anybody with this statement, because I actually mean it as a positive, but there are days when it's hard to go to a martial art workout because you're tired or you feel unmotivated. And there's something victorious about the idea of going to a place where you're going to not get your ass kicked, but you're going to get worked hard. People are going to grab you and push you and pull you, and whatever the martial art is, there's going to be that physical contact. And the act of going there when you know you're not at your best is a victory in and of itself. And when you can do that multiple times in a month or a year, you are literally achieving in ways that you can't in any other aspect of your life.
That's right. You're right. The little bit that I did it, I thought it was great. And even when it comes to lifting or whatever form of training that you want to do to take care of yourself, there's days you don't want to lift, but you're going to do it because you're going to be pissed if you don't do it.
Exactly. Yeah. It's a pretty current thing to say, but I do admire it's a meme online all over the place. But for years and years and years, there were inspirational quotes and memes about motivation, and they resonate with me. I think they resonate with most people, but they never fulfilled me until recently. The last couple of years, people have been replacing that idea about motivation with the idea of self-discipline. Like because you won't always be motivated. None of us are always motivated to go to the. In addition to Krav Maga, I do jujitsu, and there are days when I'm exhausted. I'm going to go end up lying underneath some guy who's 50 pounds heavier than me. I do not feel motivated to go do that, but I've gathered the self-discipline to go do it. And therefore I slowly get better. And I think that's a great lesson for all of us.
Yeah, you're right. You're right. And you could transition that through a lot of your daily life, really.
Absolutely. Yeah. That's the life lesson.
So what made you like step away from writing? I know you kind of took a little break in there for a while.
Yeah, it was Krav Maga. So
That's
I would say that I wrote a lot of books in a short time. This was 20 years ago, but I wrote a ton of books, and I wouldn't say I was burned out on writing, but I definitely was looking for a little break. And I'd been doing Krav Maga at that point as an instructor for I think about a decade back then. And to make a bigger story short, the people I was involved with, who I originally learned Krav Maga from, there was only a very small group of people in the whole world, really, at that time doing Krav Maga. But one of the main people was here in Los Angeles. If you weren't in Israel, you were in LA doing Krav Maga. And I got involved with them, and those people I learned from and taught with for years. And they wanted to make the organization bigger. So I had just left being the executive editor for Time Warner Audiobooks to do writing full time. And then I'd done that for a while, and then I was taking a break. And these friends of mine asked if I would help run this company that was kind of the beginning of a big Krav Maga organization. And that was fine with me. I did that. And I actually wrote a few books during that time. A few of the books that I've mentioned were written during that time. But then I got really busy running this company. And between the two companies that I ended up running, one of the companies is a standalone gym in LA that's pretty successful. The other one is the organization that you've mentioned, that's global. I just got busy. And anybody out there who is an entrepreneur will understand when I say this. I knew that I was gonna have to put aside writing for a while. So I said, okay, minimum 5 years. For 5 years, not write any books, focus on these companies. And the 5 years happened. And lo and behold, the companies weren't super successful yet. So 5 more years of working on these two companies. At this point, they're stable companies. But then it was still just busyness. So really, what ended up being what I planned for being a 5-year hiatus from writing ended up being almost 20.
Yeah, but it seems to be a hell of a ride, and it's growing.
Yeah, I thank you. Yeah, I can't regret it. Like everything's worked out, and I'm sure you can relate to this. But that saying is true. If you're doing what you love, you never work a day in your life. Like I love the things that I do, and I can't complain about it at all. Were I able to rewrite the script, I would have started back into writing about 5 or 7 years ago. But I'm doing it now, and I'm happy.
Yeah, I was gonna say now you're back to writing, right? You got a new series that you're working on, Disunion.
I have a book published. It's won a couple of awards. It's not Star Wars, but it's science fiction. It's called Disunion, and the first book is called The Mantis Gambit. It's set in its own universe, and basically the first book is a re-examination of the Civil War, but it's set in space.
Yeah, cool.
And that book is out. The next book should be out in a couple months. And so far, again, it's gotten great reviews and it's won a couple of awards, and so I'm happy.
Yeah, I was gonna say. So now you are you on a schedule to write these, or are you kind of doing this on your own and then you give it to the
on my own? Yeah. So these are self-published. I honestly, I have a couple people talking to me about representation now, but I didn't. All my publisher I haven't talked to in years. So and these days things are pretty easy to do, self-published. So I thought, why the heck not? So I started writing this book, and I did it myself. And to answer your question, I'm doing it on my own, but I'm on a schedule. The next book I want to be out. I want to have out within a year of the first book's publication, so it should be out in the next couple of months.
Excellent. Yeah, it's kind
of there'll be 3 books in the series, and
yeah, that's good that you get to do that on your own because obviously you're running a company, you're training. Now you're back to writing. So where did this idea come from? Did this just randomly?
No, it's a hugely long story that honestly is not all interesting. But to make a very long story short, back in that time I mentioned that I was writing a lot of books. The publishers that I wrote for were big publishers, HarperCollins, and before them, Bantam, Doubleday. These are big publishers, and so that's who I was writing books with. And to be frank, I was a pretty small fish in their big pond, right? I mean, they liked my writing, but they had huge name authors that they were working with. So I got recruited by this small publisher. They said, listen, come write for us. Like we're a small publisher. You're going to be a huge fish in our small pond, and we'll pay a lot of attention to you. And that was attractive to me. So they actually approached me. They said, we have this idea for a book that we own it, but we want to give it to you because we think you're the writer for it. We'll give you the rights to this idea if you'll publish with us. And the idea it wasn't mine, so I can say this. The idea was brilliant. And so I wrote this book, and I wrote the first draft, and the first draft was god awful. And that's okay. First drafts sometimes are bad. I wrote the first draft, but I had to turn it in for them. So I turned it in on time, and I said, listen, this first draft is not good, but it's our first start. Let's discuss. And they loved it. And I said, no, you can't love it. It's terrible. Let me write the second draft. And they said, no, we want to publish it. And I said, no, please don't publish it. But they were insistent. And then here's where fate intervened. They got bought out. Again, they were a small publisher. They got bought out by somebody bigger. And the bigger company bought them for their nonfiction library. They didn't want their fiction. So I got my idea back.
Oh, nice.
And that this is where the long story comes in. It's not interesting, but that idea, which again, the idea was great, but my book wasn't good. I took that kernel of an idea, spent really like it germinated for a decade, and then it became this book, which is again the first part of it is a re-examination of the Civil War. Essentially, instead of it being the South of the United States, it's a colony planet of Earth that wants to rebel, and it's all the same dynamic of
cool.
I mean, putting aside the slavery issue for a minute, but of like who has a right to secede, and what are the difference between our rights as a federation essentially versus that planet's rights as a planet. And it's that examination. And hopefully I give everybody their voice, and the reviews have noted that there are definitely people who are less good, but there are no pure bad guys and no pure good guys. Hopefully the hero and heroine are good. We connect with them, but the bad guys aren't totally evil and the good guys aren't totally good. It's really an examination of individual desires and how those play out.
I like the sounds of that. It sounds interesting. I dig it.
It's done well. And it's so I'll give one more pitch for it. Again, I was a huge Star Wars fan, but in my own writing, I actually I'm not a hard science fiction guy, but I do like science that has explanations. So in my stories, opposite of Star Wars, ships don't zoom around like they're World War II aircraft. Like if a ship's going fast, it's going to take them a couple days to arc back around. Like the physics in my books are the physics that we understand for current space travel.
Yeah, right. Yeah, to be honest, I'm not a big science fiction guy myself. I like you said, you grew up with fantasy. That's kind of where it all sparked. Yeah. But I think Star Wars is a good mixture of both. It's got the sci-fi and the fantasy elements to it.
I agree. In fact, I mentioned earlier that I was a guest author at the Phoenix Fan Fusion Comic. By the way, it's a great Comic-Con. If you like Comic-Cons, go to it. They do an awesome job there. But I was on several science fiction panels because those are the books I write. But because I mentioned Lord of the Rings, I'm a fantasy fan. I actually asked the coordinator, well, there's this other panel on fantasy writers. Can I be on that one too? I said, sure, let's see what you have to say. So I was a science fiction author on the fantasy panel, but I made the argument on that panel that you just made. I said, listen, it's all the same. I'm attracted as a writer to science fiction because I want clear-cut explanations for the tech, but the stories themselves are fantasy. You can absolutely take Star Wars and you can make them dragon riders instead of X-Wings, right? You can make them flying bats instead of the Nazgul. Right. You can have it be instead of TIE fighters. You can have it be a ring dropped in a volcano instead of a missile down the exhaust.
Yep. It's easy.
Star Wars is absolutely a fantasy story.
Yes, I agree, and that's what attract. I mean, they even did that with Tales of the Jedi, like you said. Like a lot of the older stuff, the comic stuff, where they really expanded and tried new things. Like it worked, and there was a lot of fantasy, like more of a fantasy feel to that.
Yeah, yeah, and it's brilliant. And listen, reaching back to the original sort of guidelines that George Lucas followed of the hero's journey, all that stuff. Those are ancient stories set in
Yes.
worlds where there are no lightsabers or well, there are magic swords, but there are no X-wings. There's no light speed travel. These are the adventurer goes out into the world where there's magic and monsters and has to slay a dragon.
And win and prevail.
And that's yes, and that's the story of Luke Skywalker.
Yeah. Who's your favorite character?
Oh, in Star Wars?
Yeah. Yep.
Oh my gosh. When I was a kid, it was absolutely Han Solo.
You're a Han guy. You got that
Um,
vibe.
uh,
You got that vibe.
far and away. But so for two reasons. One, because again, you maybe sense from things I've said about science fiction, I like the guys that are more grounded. Like
Yeah.
that guy feels more achievable to me. I related to Luke Skywalker as a coming of age story, but I had this sense that I was never going to have the Force myself. Right?
Yeah.
So the guy who didn't have access to the Force but still succeeded seemed more attainable to me. So I gravitated toward Han Solo for that reason. Grown up in Star Wars, and this probably you could guess from I think I said earlier, is Ben Kenobi. Um, and again, not just Obi-Wan Kenobi, but Ben Kenobi, the guy who's been through a lot and has somehow attained or reattained his faith and has somehow holds true to a mission despite what he's gone through. Maybe that's just because I'm older, but that character resonates with me a lot in my now, again, some of your audience might like some of the legacy characters or the characters in the new series, and I totally get that. But
Yeah.
I'm an originalist, so the character that resonates with me these days is Ben Kenobi.
Yeah. That's a good. You made some good valid points there. It's hard. Like Luke Skywalker is, as a kid, I was just like you said that coming of age, like you understand it,
Yeah,
right? But
yeah,
then when the prequels, I know we talked about them, and I understand what you're saying about Anakin and Padme. I know I didn't touch on that.
yeah,
That's kind of the biggest gripe is like the dialogue and their interactions
yeah.
and the CGI. Like you're right, the acting probably would have been a little different had that not been the way it was. But it's George was trying, like he basically pushed the envelope with what he did there to a
Yeah,
degree.
yeah, I get the desire, but I think the execution just didn't pan out. And because again, we're recycling toward the beginning of this conversation, but look at the actual actors. All those actors are really good. Um,
Yeah,
uh, they're fantastic. Even and I think he took some flack for the movies, but have you seen Hayden Christensen act? He's a really good actor.
he is. He really is.
Uh,
I mean,
but in those movies, because of all I assume all the green screen stuff, it just didn't really pan out.
yeah, I would think that'd be hard to do. Yeah, I didn't. I just wanted to mention that because I thought that, but I was gonna say, let's be honest here. Let's be real for a second. No,
Yeah.
okay. You were talked about the Force, and it's like, yeah, well, you knew you weren't gonna get that. Now,
Right.
walking into a store with the automatic doors. Now, you ain't gonna lie to me and say you've never done one of them.
Of course I have. Oh, absolutely. I just the other day. Are you kidding? I do
Yeah,
it every time I'm at a long red light. Like I'm
yeah.
commanding that thing to turn green every day.
Uh,
And I like to think that I did some of it, but I assume it's actually the automated system.
right.
No,
Well,
no,
we got.
I'm still hoping for the day I have it. Are you
I,
kidding?
me too, sir. Well, I appreciate. Are you gonna watch the Super Bowl?
Yeah, I'm headed there after this.
Yeah, it's fine. I don't want to take too much of your time. I honestly, I live about an hour away from the Green Bay Packers stadium. So like the Packers in my area.
Are you? Yeah.
I kind of got out of football back in like the early 2000s. I was a Tampa Bay Buccaneer fan. So yes,
Okay.
I was, Warren Sapp, Keyshawn Johnson,
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
them
Yeah. Yeah.
guys, but John Lynch, Mike Allstott. But so my son was like, Dad, are we gonna watch the Super Bowl? And I'm like, ah. So before this, we got a subscription to Paramount Plus so we could watch it. So yeah, we're gonna get wings and we're just gonna watch it. It's something to do. Something to do as a
It's a
family.
social, yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
And again, you can edit this out if it's controversial, but I actually don't watch that much football anymore. I just get tired.
Yeah.
It's 15 seconds of action and 45 seconds of downtime, and I just get bored. I actually like the plays and I like the game, but I wish that they would. Frankly, I wish they would play it more like rugby, where there's
Yeah.
less stoppage and more action. So I'm going to go watch because it's a social event and I like the sport, but I don't watch football regularly because it's too long. It's you invest 3.5 hours of your time for what
Right.
ends up being about 45 minutes of actual stuff.
Yeah, I agree with you. I don't like when they take a knee to waste the clock. I think that should be a penalty. Play the game.
Yeah.
You guys are getting paid a bunch of money. Play the game. That's the way I feel.
I've actually, I'm not a huge rugby fan, but I appreciate it. Have you ever watched a rugby match?
No, not on TV. No.
Again, I'm not a huge fan, but I've watched some matches just to learn about it. Here's the only thing I'll say about it is that when they have down, it's basically football on speed. But they get penalized if they don't pick the ball back up and play right away.
Really?
Your team gets penalized. So the referee will blow for what they would call a down. It's very similar to football in that one little snapshot. When they hit the ground, they're down.
Yep.
But they have to pick the ball right back up and start playing again. And if they don't, they get a penalty.
Wow.
Boom, 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 boom.
Yeah, that's high octane right there.
Yeah.
Jeez. I like the UFC. I was a big UFC fan. I liked, obviously, because of martial arts. Chuck Liddell was my guy.
He was awesome.
Yeah.
He was great in his day. Yeah, I agree. He was a good guy. And he was one of the first guys who, although he actually did have a good grappling background, what made him great was his striking was incredible, and he was good enough on the ground that all the grapplers who took him down, he could get back up.
Get back up, yeah.
Yeah.
I think he went to college for like he got a scholarship for wrestling. I think actually.
Yeah, and again, he was actually a better grappler than you saw, but he didn't need to be better because his punching was so good. And what really defeated all the other grapplers of that era was that, except for him at that time, everybody who went down stayed down.
Yeah.
But he was able to get back up. And so they'd take him down, he'd scramble back up. And scramble, I use respectfully, he used technique to get back up. And then he would that right cross was just devastating.
Yeah, the golden age, as I like to call it. Yeah. Now the sport's evolved and mixed martial arts has really become mixed martial arts. Like you got to be fluent in everything. Like you said, you train, you do Krav Maga, you do jiu-jitsu now, like you're incorporating all different.
I fought Muay Thai for a little bit too. I did some Muay Thai fights.
Really? I didn't know that.
Yeah, not a big deal. All like amateur low level stuff. But I did it because Krav Maga I fought, but I wanted to go in the ring and fight somebody who really wanted to hurt me. I wanted to experience that stress. And I did it way more for dealing with the stress of it than for making a career of it. I never wanted to be a pro fighter. I just wanted to know what it's like to, because we train hard. And those of your audience, and maybe for your experience as well, you can train really hard, but people aren't trying to kill you. They might even be trying to hurt you a little bit, but no one's trying to destroy you. And I wanted to go into the ring with a crowd where somebody who their pride was involved, their fans were involved, and I wanted them to really, really want to knock my head off. Yeah, and it worked out fine for me. I won my fights, but yeah, I believe in that stuff.
Yeah, well, that's really the only, because you truly don't know until it's happening. Like
that's absolutely true.
Yeah. You got to be able to. Nobody knows what it's gonna. You got a guy coming at you, and he's gonna punch you in the face. What are you gonna do? You got to.
Yeah.
So, well, I appreciate it very much, sir, that you took time.
You bet, man. It was a pleasure for me. Thanks for having me on.
Yeah, this was a blast, and I'll put some links to your Krav Maga site. I know you have a site for that in case people are interested in learning a little bit more about it. I know you got videos out there too and books. Like you said, you did some defensive books.
There's an app called the Krav Maga Pro app. There are a couple of books. People are welcome to check those out. But yeah, and send me a link to this whole thing and I'll put it out to my world as well.
Yeah, this was a lot of fun again. And thank you for creating. I like to always pay homage for the great stuff that you wrote for us.
Oh, thank you.
Great
God,
stories.
there's a big, thank you.
Magical.
I appreciate it.
Making magic for us. But
thanks, man. I'll talk to you soon.
Yeah. All right. Thanks. And we'll talk to you again.